All right, it's been another month, so now it's time to go over my poster collection for the month of October. So all the posters that I'm going to show you in this video were posted during the month of October or were supposed to be posted during the month of October. I'm going to do kind of like a post-mortem, just kind of talk a little bit about each poster, what I liked, what I didn't like, what I thought I could have done better, and hopefully you might be able to take something away from it. But that's enough talking, so let's get into it. So the first poster that I posted in the month of October was actually really fitting. What the poster ended up becoming was just kind of a graphic that had a lot of text and told this really weird short story about a drain. Specifically, a drain named Gurgly. The poster first started off with the image of the sink. Something about the image just made me think it was interesting, so I just wanted to use it. So I brought it in, started messing around with things, and then I came up with a composition that I thought was okay. So as you can see, the composition that I ended up with was keeping the picture in the top right, and then having text kind of fill around the border around it. And while that was fine on its own, it felt like it was missing something. So what I ended up doing was creating this kind of swirling pattern with the text that says down the drain. And what's also neat about it is it kind of comes off the image. So that way it has a little bit more dimension and kind of interacts with the text as well as the image and kind of brings it all together. But once all that was situated, I had to come up with a copy to put into the rest of the poster. So I went to ChatGPT and I had it just make me a short horror story about a drain. And then this is what it gave me. It's not the greatest short story, it's not the greatest poster, but it was fun to make, and I think it's kind of funny, especially since I was able to post it during the month of October. Now this poster was a lot of fun to put together. Whenever I first started working on this poster, I was trying to do a very grid-based approach. I had everything laid out nice and pretty on a grid. I think I actually had the grid kind of on an angle, so I thought that'd be a little bit more interesting. But it really didn't feel that exciting to me. So what I ended up doing instead was taking all of the pieces of the poster that I had before and then trying to imagine if every part of it had gravity. So I had all the parts just kind of falling and leaning on each other exactly as if it had gravity and had fallen into the crevice between the sticker graphic and the photograph on the left. Honestly, I just thought it was really fun to make, and it's a fun poster, but it's nothing too crazy or exciting. Now this is a poster that I almost didn't post. I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with it. I'm just not really sure it's that exciting. The composition is kind of interesting since it's kind of heavy on the left and then empty on the right. Photography is interesting as well as the coloring. But for whatever reason, after I came back to this after, like 10 weeks, it just didn't really feel all that exciting. But I still thought it was good, and so I ended up posting it. Now this was a poster that I did using a grid for my base. I wasn't really sure how I wanted to approach this poster, but I knew I wanted to have really bold text at the bottom and then have the images at the top. And if I remember correctly, the two black and white photographs were the first things that I kind of put in, and then from there I added in the orange statue in the middle, which this actually worked out perfectly because everything is aligned to a grid except for that statue. And so the statue just has this nice organic shape that kind of breaks the grid and kind of draws the eye. But once I had that finalized, I put some text on the left and then I put some stuff on the right, and it was finished. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how it came out. Now, if you haven't figured it out yet, I was really trying to do a lot of grid-based posters during this time. This one was a little bit more loose with its approach, but it still was based off of a grid. I believe the first things that I worked on was the text in the black boxes. I kind of laid those out in a way that I thought was interesting, and I was just trying to get them connected to layer up and stuff. And then once I had that in a place that I liked, I think I started adding in the photography that you see on the right and the top. But I still wanted to incorporate some other elements. It just felt like it was empty. So the next thing that I added was a picture of a telephone that kind of wraps around the image. And then I added a threshold adjustment and add some color to it, just so it wasn't as distracting and it felt more like a graphical element than a photo. And then the very last thing that I added was the numbers that you see in the bottom that kind of come in at the top as well. I really didn't have a plan with the numbers. I just knew that I wanted to incorporate a little bit more stuff. So really, I was just kind of experimenting, throwing some stuff around, trying some blend modes, and trying to work with the grid as best as I could. And then this is where I ended up with, which honestly, I'm really happy with how it came out. It's definitely different from the posters that I had posted for the rest of the month, and so I just think it looks really cool and interesting. Now this poster was pretty fun to make. It started off with the image in the very middle, and that's where I built everything out from. Once again, I think I was still using a grid, so I think the first thing that I did was put the photograph in the middle, align it to the grid, and I think after that I decided that I wanted to have text on the bottom on both both the left and the right, and then have another photograph underneath that fills up the rest of the image. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just kind of knew that was the idea that I wanted to go for. And that's when I found this image of this woman in a chair and she's just walking off right. And I thought it was interesting. So what I ended up doing was splitting it in the middle and then putting each half on each half of the poster, which makes it a little bit more dynamic because it's not an exact mirror, but it's still close enough to where it has a very symmetrical look. I think after that, the last things that I added was the no love in the middle. Kind of breaking up the image like this and then putting text in the middle is not something I would typically do, but I think that's what makes this poster exciting and fun. And then after that, I just added the text that were on the upper left and right and the barcode at the top, and I thought it was done. Honestly, pretty happy with how this one turned out. Now, this is the first poster for this month that I didn't end up posting. I guess I wouldn't say there's anything particularly wrong with this poster. I just didn't think it was that great. It was fun to experiment with the type in this way, having it kind of bleed and swirl off. Has a nice movement to it, but it just didn't really feel that cohesive as a design. So as an experiment, great. As a finalized poster, could have been better. And then once again, more experiments with the grid. So what I did is I took this image of this girl and then I just kind of made a lot of different masks using the grid in a bunch of different locations. Some of them are in the gutter of the grid, some of them are on the actual grid, and I think that makes it a little bit more exciting. But once I had everything laid out the way that I wanted, then I could start adding in everything else, like the numbers, like the copy, like all of the grunge effects and that kind of stuff. Now, this definitely isn't my favorite poster, but I do think it's kind of cool and it does have a nice, cool, grungy look to it. Now, this poster was mostly just an experiment. I saw this image of this weird looking mannequin and I thought I could do something cool with it. So once I had the background removed from the mannequin, the first thing that I did was work on the typography. And I came out with this layout where it says imposter and it kind of makes a square around the mannequin. And then from there, really, I just started adding in random graphic elements, just trying to make it chaotic and grungy. Honestly, there's not really much more to say about it other than that. Not my favorite poster, but it turned out all right. Now, this was another fun one. Now, I kind of used the same approach that I did to one of the earlier posters, the no love one, to this one. Just kind of have everything centered and then just a few things on the left and right. But I guess the main difference here is there's a little bit more focus on the typography since I just have this one phrase and it's really bold and right in the center of the image. But I still have a dynamic composition while still adhering to the grid. Since the image takes up most of the poster, and then the big bold text a little bit less at the bottom. Honestly, I didn't really try out anything new here, but I am happy with how it came out. Now for this poster, I really just kind of wanted to play around with some type. I came up with the phrase fractured focus, so really I just started messing around with the typography, blurring it, distorting it, cutting it up, so then I ended up here. But since I had this nice cut going right in the middle on this diagonal, I thought it might be interesting to put a picture on the very top of the image, but it has this kind of interesting shape rather than it being just straight horizontal, which I think is interesting and it goes really well with the focus of this poster. But really after that, it was just me just kind of fiddling around with some different elements, fiddling around with the copy, and just trying to come up with something that was something that I don't typically do. So this was definitely a fun poster to do, and I feel like I got to try out some stuff that I normally don't do. Now this is the second poster that I was supposed to post this month, but I actually didn't. Honestly, there's nothing really wrong with this poster, it just wasn't that exciting and it just didn't really feel like my style. I guess it kind of reminds me of that brutalist tech kind of style, which is what I was going for, but it's not something I normally do. And so I just didn't really feel that comfortable posting this because it was more of an experiment and me trying out something new than it was something that I felt was a really well done, completed design. But I still wanted to share it with this world, and so it ends up in this video. Now this is probably my favorite poster from this month. If I remember correctly, where I got the inspiration from this poster was the first image of the guitar that you see here. I thought it'd be really cool just to do a lot of simple shapes with the instruments and then just kind of make up this really cool collage. And then I also did a little bit of experimenting with the typography on the left where I kind of made this kind of tag looking thing. Honestly, I think this poster turned out great and it feels really cohesive. So the way I made this poster was actually kind of interesting. I started off with the image of the woman. I was trying to remove the background, but Photoshop did a really crappy job with it. But there was something about it that I thought was cool, and so I wanted to try to use it with the poorly selected mask. So I think once I decided on that, I started to work in the typography. Since the selection was already kind of crappy, I thought this would be a good poster to kind of experiment with some typography more. And so I came up with this really weird kind of shape using the word unspoken. Not really traditional, breaks a lot of rules, but who cares? It's fun to make. And then after that, I added the picture of the eye, which kind of blends in really well with the photo. So it kind of seems like it's one photo. And then I just added in some other graphic elements just to make it feel kind of rough and grungy. So yeah, the creation of this poster was pretty interesting. And this is the last poster that I posted for the month of October. So even though I'm happy with how this poster turned out, there's not really much to say about it. It's pretty grid-based and the composition is pretty simple. Probably the most exciting thing about it is that I cut out the man holding the umbrella, so he has a more organic shape rather than a square one. And really that was the main idea that I had for this poster. And then once I had that, I just kind of added in some extra elements at the bottom just to kind of give it a little bit more weight on the bottom so it wasn't so top heavy. But yeah, this one was pretty simple, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. So those were all of the personal designs that I made for the month of October. But there were a couple more posters that I actually ended up posting. So just to give a little bit of context, this entire month I've been taking a poster design course, and of course, for the poster design course, I've had to make a couple different posters. And because of that, I've actually been posting them in between my regular posts for this month. And that's why I'm kind of separating them out a little bit. So here are the posters that I made for this poster design course. So this first poster is a poster that I made for the band Mood Ring and their album Stargazer. Now for the part of the course that I was on at the time, it was talking about chrome effects and solarization. And I'm not sure why, but something about those effects kind of stood out to me. And I thought that this album would be a good use of those effects. And so really this poster is me just experimenting with those effects, but I still wanted to try to come up with a really nice looking poster that had an interesting composition. So it first started off with the image of the snake. So I did some solarization to it, and then I did some coloring to it. And then after that, I went to the top text. I kind of knew I wanted it to have this kind of interesting motion and make it look like it was a chrome effect. But once I had the word Mood Ring laid out, I thought it would be cool to have the word Stargazer kind of interwoven between that layout. And then I found this really cool image of an eclipse. And since the title of the album is Stargazer, which kind of has a kind of celestial kind of sounding theme, I thought this would go really well. It also really draws the eye and adds a point of interest. We'll just add the little squares at the bottom left and the bottom right. Now this poster is a poster design that I did for a podcast that I listen to a lot, and that's Unexplained Mysteries by Parcast. Now for this part of the course, what we were learning about was a lot of different blur effects. And I thought with the theme kind of being mysteries and things being obscured, I thought that this would make the perfect poster designs for it. So I actually did a lot of experimenting and trying testing things out. But what kind of came out of that was I actually made a series of posters rather than just one. So this is the first one that I made. And then this was the second one that I made. I found this really weird image of this woman. It had this kind of weird obscuring effect. And so I just kind of took that and kind of enunciated it a little bit more. And then after that, I distorted the image so that way it felt like it was being stretched and falling off. And perfectly enough, it left this perfect space for me to put the title of the podcast. And now this poster was me trying to do the exact same things that I had done on the previous designs, but with a more grid-based approach. I think the other two are a little bit more exciting, but I'm still really happy with how this one came out. Has a really strong composition using the grid, but has a few elements that kind of break out of the grid, so it has some natural feel to it as well. Now this is the final poster that I did for this course. So really, it was kind of a free-for-all and just kind of incorporating as many elements from the course that you possibly could. So what I decided to do was a album poster for one of my favorite albums from last year, which is Vane's This World Is Going to Ruin You. And Vane is a hardcore, metalcore, mathcore type of band. And since they have kind of a dark and abrasive sound, I thought this kind of poster would work perfectly for it. So really it started with the image of the woman, and then I put an image of a flower on top of her mouth. And then from there, I started adding in a bunch of different elements, specifically the black grunge elements that you kind of see throughout the poster. And then once I had that laid out, I found out that the bottom left is where most of the black is. And so I thought that would be the perfect place to put a lot of the text that you'd be reading. And really, I just spent a lot of time there, just kind of experimenting, just trying to make it look chaotic and grungy. And then once I had that laid out, I came back to the image and I added this image of the clock as well as the flowers on the other side of her face. Overall, I'm super happy with how this one came out. Has a really cool feel to it. I feel like it goes with the theme of the album, and overall, just looks good. And then along with the course, we also had 2 workshops, and this was the poster that I made for the first one. We had to give ourselves limitations, and so the limitation that I chose was that I was going to do a text-based design that was very chaotic and did not adhere to a grid. This one took me a long time to get down because it's not how I would typically design, but it was a lot of fun to make, and I think the results came out really well. Something that I don't normally do is kind of choose how I'm going to design a poster. And so I think going into it with a clear thought of what I wanted to accomplish kind of made me go through a different thought process, but honestly, I really like how it came out. Having that kind of rigidity was kind of annoying, but I think it helped me make a lot of decisions that made this poster turn out really cool in the end. And then this is the design that I made for the second workshop. So I pretty much decided just to do the very opposite of what I did for the last poster. Photography based on a grid. Prompt that I got was Seeds of Change, so I really wanted to emphasize this feeling of growth. And so I played around with the type because I knew I kind of wanted to have something cool going on with the type. And then after that, I grabbed this image of the sunflower, but since I wanted to incorporate some kind of natural looking element rather than just being in a square, I cut out the background from the flower petals, and so that way there's some kind of organic shape throughout this poster and it isn't just squares. But that also plays in really well with the type since it also doesn't necessarily adhere to the grid. But once I had that kind of decided, I started playing around with the rest of the composition and where I'd put the rest of the information. And so I put the type on the bottom, and then I added another photograph on the right, as well as just some designery kind of element on the top right to kind of top it off. And just like the last poster, having to adhere to a specific set of rules was not really how I typically designed, but because of that, I think this turned out really freaking cool, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. And so those are all the posters that I either posted or were supposed to post during the month of October. But let me know in the comments below what you thought about these posters. Do you have a favorite? Do you have a least favorite? Were there some that I maybe downplayed that maybe I should be a little bit more proud of? Let me know in the comments. And if you found this video helpful or entertaining in any way, I'd appreciate it if you would check out the rest of my channel and then consider subscribing. I hope to see you in the next video.